Question 1. The review process indicates that an applicant for a Pennsylvania non-resident license to carry firearms has disclosed a recent arrest for a misdemeanor offense that was subsequently dismissed by the court. Which of the following actions best represents the appropriate professional response in evaluating this applicant's eligibility? Option A. Request official court documentation confirming the dismissal of the charges and review the nature of the original offense to ensure it does not fall under any disqualifying categories as defined by Pennsylvania law, while also verifying the applicant's disclosure. Option B. Proceed with the license approval, assuming that a dismissed charge means the applicant is eligible and poses no risk, without further investigation. Option C. Rely solely on the applicant's verbal assurance that the charges were dismissed and that the incident was minor, without seeking any official verification. Option D. Deny the application immediately based on the arrest alone, regardless of the dismissal, to err on the side of caution for public safety. The correct answer is A. Request official court documentation confirming the dismissal of the charges and review the nature of the original offense to ensure it does not fall under any disqualifying categories as defined by Pennsylvania law, while also verifying the applicant's disclosure. Explanation. The review process indicates a scenario where an applicant for a Pennsylvania non-resident license to carry firearms has a recent arrest for a misdemeanor offense that was subsequently dismissed. This situation is professionally challenging because it requires careful judgment to balance the applicant's right to apply for a license with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania's legitimate interest in public safety and preventing firearm access by individuals who may pose a risk. The applicant's past interaction with the criminal justice system, even if resolved favorably, necessitates a thorough and accurate assessment. The best professional approach involves a direct and transparent inquiry into the dismissed charge, focusing on obtaining official documentation and understanding the circumstances surrounding the arrest and dismissal. This approach is correct because Pennsylvania law, specifically the Uniform Firearms Act, 18 C.S., Section 6101 et sec., requires applicants to disclose any arrests, regardless of disposition. Furthermore, the Pennsylvania State Police, responsible for processing these applications, must verify the accuracy of the information provided and assess whether the dismissed charge, in conjunction with other factors, might disqualify an applicant. Obtaining official court records confirming the dismissal is crucial for accurate adjudication and demonstrates adherence to the statutory requirements for background checks and eligibility determination. This method ensures that the decision is based on verifiable facts and legal precedent, upholding the integrity of the licensing process. An incorrect approach would be to disregard the dismissed arrest simply because the charges were dropped, without seeking official confirmation of the disposition. This fails to acknowledge the statutory requirement for disclosure and the licensing authority's duty to investigate all relevant information. Another incorrect approach is to assume that a dismissed charge automatically means the applicant is eligible, without considering the underlying nature of the offense or any potential patterns of behavior that might be revealed by the arrest details. This bypasses the necessary due diligence and could lead to an inaccurate assessment of risk. Finally, an approach that involves making a decision based on personal opinion or assumptions about the applicant's character, rather than on documented facts and legal criteria, is ethically and regulatorily unsound. Such an approach undermines the objective standards set forth by Pennsylvania law for firearm licensing. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes factual accuracy, legal compliance, and objective assessment. This involves 1. Identifying all relevant legal requirements, e.g., disclosure of arrests, disqualifying offenses under the Uniform Firearms Act. 2. Gathering all available factual information, including official documentation of arrests and dispositions. 3. Objectively evaluating the gathered information against the established legal criteria. 4. Making a decision based solely on the facts and the law, avoiding personal bias or assumptions. 5. Documenting the entire process and the rationale for the decision. Question 2. Examination of the data shows an applicant seeking a Pennsylvania non-resident license to carry firearms possesses a valid firearm permit from their home state of Ohio. What is the most critical step in determining the applicant's eligibility for a Pennsylvania license? Option A. Assuming that because Ohio is a neighboring state and the applicant has a valid permit, they automatically qualify for a Pennsylvania non-resident license to carry firearms. Option B, focusing solely on the completeness of the application form submitted by the applicant, without independently verifying the legal standing of Ohio's firearm laws or their reciprocity with Pennsylvania. Option C, accepting the applicant's assertion of being a law-abiding citizen and overlooking the necessity of a thorough background check for disqualifying factors under Pennsylvania law. Option D, verifying that Ohio has a current reciprocity agreement with Pennsylvania for the recognition of firearm, carry permits, and confirming the applicant meets all Pennsylvania statutory eligibility requirements, including the absence of any disqualifying factors. The correct answer is D, verifying that Ohio has a current reciprocity agreement with Pennsylvania for the recognition of firearm, carry permits, and confirming the applicant meets all Pennsylvania statutory eligibility requirements, including the absence of any disqualifying factors. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant for a Pennsylvania non-resident license to carry firearms to navigate the specific requirements and potential pitfalls of interstate reciprocity and the application process. Misinterpreting or failing to adhere to the precise legal standards can lead to denial of the license, potential legal repercussions, and a failure to uphold the integrity of the firearm licensing system. Careful judgment is required to ensure all documentation is accurate, all prerequisites are met, and the applicant's circumstances align with Pennsylvania law. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously verifying that the applicant meets all Pennsylvania statutory requirements for a non-resident license to carry firearms, including confirming their residency in a state with reciprocal firearm laws with Pennsylvania, and ensuring they are not disqualified under Pennsylvania law, e.g., due to criminal history, mental health adjudications, or other prohibitions. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the Pennsylvania Uniform Firearm Act, specifically focusing on the eligibility criteria for non-residents seeking to carry firearms within the Commonwealth. It prioritizes adherence to the letter of the law, ensuring that only qualified individuals are granted such licenses, thereby upholding public safety and the legal framework governing firearm carry. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves assuming that simply possessing a valid firearm license in another state automatically grants eligibility for a Pennsylvania non-resident license to carry firearms without further verification. This is professionally unacceptable because Pennsylvania law dictates specific conditions for non-resident licenses, including the requirement for reciprocity with the applicant's home state and the absence of disqualifying factors under Pennsylvania statutes. This approach fails to acknowledge that reciprocity is not automatic and that Pennsylvania retains the right to assess eligibility based on its own laws. Another incorrect approach is to overlook the importance of the applicant's home state's laws and focus solely on the application form itself. This is professionally unacceptable as Pennsylvania's non-resident license to carry firearms is predicated on the principle of reciprocity, meaning the applicant's home state must have laws that allow for the recognition of Pennsylvania licenses. Ignoring the home state's legal framework undermines the foundation of the reciprocity agreement and Pennsylvania's ability to grant such licenses. A further incorrect approach is to proceed with the application without thoroughly investigating any potential disqualifying factors under Pennsylvania law, such as past convictions or mental health adjudications, simply because the applicant claims to be law-abiding. This is professionally unacceptable because Pennsylvania law explicitly prohibits individuals with certain histories from obtaining a license to carry firearms, regardless of their current claims. A thorough background check and verification of eligibility are mandated by law to ensure public safety. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a systematic decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the relevant Pennsylvania statutes governing the non-resident license to carry firearms. This includes identifying all eligibility criteria, disqualifying factors, and the specific documentation required. The next step involves meticulously gathering and verifying all information provided by the applicant, cross-referencing it with official records where necessary. Crucially, the professional must assess whether the applicant's home state has a reciprocal agreement with Pennsylvania, and if the applicant meets all Pennsylvania-specific eligibility requirements. Any doubts or ambiguities should be resolved through consultation with legal counsel or relevant authorities before proceeding. This ensures a decision is made based on a thorough, legally sound, and ethically responsible evaluation. Question 3. Upon reviewing the requirements for obtaining a Pennsylvania non-resident license to carry firearms, an applicant from New Jersey is considering the most effective and legally sound method to proceed with their application. Which of the following approaches best aligns with Pennsylvania's regulatory framework for non-resident firearm permits? Option A. Assume that their valid New Jersey firearms permit allows them to carry firearms in Pennsylvania without a separate Pennsylvania license. Option B. Rely on advice from online firearm enthusiast forums to understand the application process for a Pennsylvania non-resident license to carry firearms. Option C. Thoroughly research and adhere to the specific application procedures and documentation requirements for non-residents as outlined by the Pennsylvania State Police and Title 18 PA. C. S. Section 6109. Option D. Submit an application with only their New Jersey permit and a general statement of intent to carry in Pennsylvania, expecting the state to fill in any missing details. The correct answer is C. Thoroughly research and adhere to the specific application procedures and documentation requirements for non-residents as outlined by the Pennsylvania State Police and Title 18 PA. C. S. Section 6109. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant to navigate the specific requirements for obtaining a Pennsylvania non-resident license to carry firearms, which involves understanding the interplay between their home state's laws and Pennsylvania's regulations. Misinterpreting or failing to adhere to these requirements can lead to denial of the application, potential legal complications, and a misunderstanding of their rights and responsibilities. Careful judgment is required to ensure all documentation is accurate, complete, and compliant with Pennsylvania law. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves thoroughly researching and understanding Pennsylvania's specific requirements for non-resident applicants, including any reciprocity agreements or specific application procedures outlined by the Pennsylvania State Police. This approach ensures that the applicant provides all necessary documentation, such as proof of residency in their home state, a completed Pennsylvania application form, and any required background check authorizations in strict accordance with Title 18 PA. C. S. Section 6109. This adherence to the explicit statutory requirements is the only way to ensure a valid and compliant application. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves assuming that a valid firearms license from one's home state automatically grants the right to carry in Pennsylvania without further application or verification. This fails to recognize that Pennsylvania has its own distinct licensing process for non-residents, and simply possessing a license elsewhere does not satisfy Pennsylvania's statutory requirements under Title 18 PA. C. S. Section 6109. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on informal advice from friends or online forums regarding the application process. While these sources may offer some guidance, they are not authoritative and can lead to misinformation. Pennsylvania law mandates specific procedures and documentation, and failing to follow these official requirements, as outlined by the Pennsylvania State Police, can result in a flawed application. A further incorrect approach is to submit an incomplete application with missing information or documentation, hoping it will be overlooked. Pennsylvania's licensing statutes are clear about the necessary components of an application. Incomplete submissions are grounds for denial and do not demonstrate the diligence required to comply with the law. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to the specific statutory and regulatory framework of the jurisdiction in question. This involves 1. Identifying the relevant jurisdiction, Pennsylvania, and the specific license type, non-resident license to carry firearms. 2. Consulting official sources for the governing laws and regulations, Title 18 PA. C. S. Section 6109 and Pennsylvania State Police Guidance. 3. Gathering all required documentation and information as specified by those official sources. 4. Submitting the application accurately and completely. 5. Verifying compliance with any reciprocity agreements or specific non-resident provisions. Question 4. When evaluating an application for a Pennsylvania non-resident license to carry firearms, what is the most critical step an applicant must take regarding their home state's firearm licensing status? Option A. Rely on general knowledge of firearm laws in their home state to determine their eligibility for a Pennsylvania non-resident license. Option B. Submit their Pennsylvania application without independently verifying their home state license, trusting that the issuing authority will cross-reference information. Option C. Confirm that their home state issues a formal license to carry firearms and that their current license is valid and meets Pennsylvania's requirements for non-residents. Option D. Ensure they are legally permitted to possess a firearm in their home state, regardless of whether a specific carry license is issued. The correct answer is C. Confirm that their home state issues a formal license to carry firearms and that their current license is valid and meets Pennsylvania's requirements for non-residents. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant for a Pennsylvania non-resident license to carry firearms to navigate potentially conflicting information regarding their home state's licensing requirements and Pennsylvania's specific criteria. Misinterpreting or failing to adhere to these requirements can lead to denial of the application, potential legal repercussions, and a failure to uphold the integrity of the licensing process. Careful judgment is required to ensure all conditions are met accurately and honestly. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves thoroughly researching and understanding both Pennsylvania's requirements for non-resident applicants and the specific licensing laws of the applicant's home state. This approach ensures that the applicant can provide accurate documentation and attest to meeting all necessary qualifications. Specifically, Pennsylvania law requires that a non-resident applicant for a license to carry firearms must be licensed to carry a firearm in their state of residence. Therefore, confirming the validity and scope of their home state license is paramount. This approach directly addresses the statutory requirement by ensuring the applicant possesses a valid license from their home jurisdiction, which is a prerequisite for Pennsylvania to grant a non-resident license. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that holding a firearm legally in one's home state is sufficient, without verifying if that state actually issues a formal license to carry firearms. This fails to meet Pennsylvania's explicit requirement for a license from the home state, potentially leading to an application denial based on a misunderstanding of the prerequisite. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on Pennsylvania's application form, without independently verifying the status and validity of the applicant's home state license. This could result in submitting an application based on incomplete or inaccurate information, as the applicant might not realize their home state license has expired, been suspended, or does not permit carrying in the manner required by Pennsylvania. A further incorrect approach is to rely on informal advice or outdated information regarding reciprocity or licensing requirements. This can lead to significant errors in understanding the current legal landscape, potentially resulting in an application that does not meet the active statutory requirements of either Pennsylvania or the applicant's home state. Professional reasoning. Professionals involved in the firearm licensing process should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes accuracy, adherence to statutory requirements, and thorough verification. This involves 1. Identifying all applicable legal and regulatory frameworks, in this case, Pennsylvania's Uniform Firearms Act, and the laws of the applicant's home state. 2. Verifying all factual assertions made by the applicant against official records and legal requirements. 3. Ensuring that all documentation submitted is current, valid, and directly addresses the stated requirements. 4. Maintaining a commitment to transparency and honesty throughout the application process. Question 5. The analysis reveals that an applicant for a Pennsylvania non-resident license to carry firearms has a prior arrest for a misdemeanor offense that was subsequently dismissed and the record expunged. When completing the uniform firearm application, what is the most appropriate course of action regarding this prior arrest? Option A. Only disclose the arrest if it resulted in a conviction, as dismissed charges are not relevant. Option B. Fully disclose the arrest and its dismissal, providing any available documentation to clarify the outcome. Option C. State on the application that no arrest occurred as the matter was resolved favorably. Option D. Omit the arrest from the application as the charges were dismissed and the record expunged. The correct answer is B. Fully disclose the arrest and its dismissal, providing any available documentation to clarify the outcome. Explanation. The analysis reveals a scenario where an individual seeking a Pennsylvania non-resident license to carry firearms, LTC, has a prior arrest for a misdemeanor offense that was subsequently dismissed. This situation is professionally challenging because it requires careful judgment to navigate the nuances of Pennsylvania's firearms laws concerning expunged or dismissed offenses, and to ensure accurate disclosure without misrepresenting facts. The applicant's understanding of the legal disposition of their past encounter with law enforcement is crucial. The correct approach involves a thorough understanding of Pennsylvania's Uniform Firearm Application requirements and the legal implications of dismissed charges. Specifically, the applicant must accurately report the arrest and its disposition, even if the record was expunged or the charges were dismissed. Pennsylvania law, under 18 Pa. C. S. Section 6109, E. 1, Roman 4, prohibits the issuance of a license to carry a firearm to individuals who have been arrested for a crime punishable by imprisonment exceeding 1 year and whose prosecution has not been terminated in their favor. A dismissal is considered a termination in their favor. However, the application requires disclosure of all arrests, regardless of the outcome. Therefore, the best professional practice is to fully disclose the arrest and its dismissal, providing any necessary documentation to clarify the outcome. This ensures transparency and compliance with the application's disclosure requirements, preventing potential issues arising from incomplete or misleading information. An incorrect approach involves omitting the arrest entirely from the application, believing that a dismissed charge does not need to be reported. This is a significant regulatory failure because Pennsylvania's firearm application explicitly requires disclosure of all arrests, regardless of whether charges were filed or if the case was dismissed or expunged. Failing to disclose constitutes a material misrepresentation on the application, which can lead to denial of the license and potential criminal penalties for making a false statement. Another incorrect approach is to misrepresent the disposition of the arrest, for example, by stating that no arrest occurred or that the charges were dropped without acknowledging the initial arrest. This is an ethical and regulatory failure, as it involves providing false information on a legal document. Such misrepresentation undermines the integrity of the licensing process and demonstrates a lack of honesty, which is a fundamental requirement for firearm ownership. A further incorrect approach is to assume that because the arrest did not result in a conviction, it is irrelevant and therefore does not need to be disclosed. While a conviction is a more direct disqualifier, Pennsylvania law and the application process are designed to gather comprehensive information about an applicant's history with law enforcement. Dismissed charges, even if they do not automatically disqualify an applicant, are still relevant information that the issuing authority has the right to review. Failing to disclose them, even with the belief that they are not disqualifying, is a failure to comply with the explicit disclosure mandates of the application. Professionals in this situation should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes honesty, thoroughness, and strict adherence to regulatory requirements. This involves 1. Understanding the specific disclosure obligations of the Pennsylvania Uniform Firearm Application. 2. Verifying the exact legal disposition of any past encounters with law enforcement, including arrests, charges, and their outcomes. 3. Disclosing all required information accurately and completely, even if it seems minor or not directly disqualifying. 4. Providing supporting documentation when necessary to clarify the disclosed information. 5. Consulting with legal counsel or the issuing authority if there is any ambiguity regarding disclosure requirements. Question 6. Comparative studies suggest that individuals often face complex legal considerations when carrying firearms across state lines. A Pennsylvania resident who holds a valid Pennsylvania license to carry firearms plans to spend an extended period, several months, working in Ohio. The individual intends to bring their legally owned handgun for personal protection during their stay in Ohio. What is the most prudent course of action to ensure legal compliance with firearm carry regulations in Ohio while temporarily residing there? Option A. Contact a friend who lives in Ohio and ask them if it is generally permissible to carry a firearm with an out-of-state license. Option B. Assume that a valid Pennsylvania license to carry firearms is universally recognized for carry purposes in all other states, including Ohio, and proceed with carrying the firearm. Option C. Research Ohio's laws regarding firearm carry for non-residents and investigate whether Ohio recognizes Pennsylvania's license to carry firearms for temporary residents, or if a specific Ohio permit or notification is required. Option D. Carry the firearm in Ohio without attempting to verify Ohio's specific laws, relying on the belief that their Pennsylvania license is sufficient for any state. The correct answer is C. Research Ohio's laws regarding firearm carry for non-residents and investigate whether Ohio recognizes Pennsylvania's license to carry firearms for temporary residents, or if a specific Ohio permit or notification is required. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Pennsylvania resident seeking to carry a firearm for self-defense while temporarily residing in another state. The core difficulty lies in navigating the reciprocity agreements between Pennsylvania and the destination state, as well as understanding the nuances of carrying a firearm across state lines when one's primary residence and licensing jurisdiction differ from their temporary location. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with all applicable laws and avoid potential legal entanglements. The best professional approach involves proactively researching and understanding the specific firearm, carry laws of the destination state, and any applicable reciprocity agreements with Pennsylvania. This includes verifying if Pennsylvania's license to carry firearms is recognized in the destination state for temporary residents, and if not, determining the requirements for obtaining a temporary permit or complying with the destination state's laws for non-residents. This approach is correct because it prioritizes legal compliance and safety by ensuring the individual is fully informed and adheres to the regulations of both their home state and the state they are visiting. This aligns with the ethical responsibility of any firearm owner to be a responsible and law-abiding citizen. An incorrect approach would be to assume that a valid Pennsylvania license to carry firearms automatically grants the right to carry a firearm in any other state, regardless of residency status or the destination state's specific laws. This assumption is a significant regulatory failure, as reciprocity agreements are not universal and often have specific conditions. Another incorrect approach would be to rely solely on informal advice from friends or online forums without verifying the information with official sources. This is a critical ethical and regulatory failure because it bypasses the established legal framework and could lead to unintentional violations of the law, potentially resulting in severe penalties. A further incorrect approach would be to carry the firearm without any attempt to understand the destination state's laws, believing that ignorance of the law is a valid defense. This demonstrates a disregard for legal obligations and a failure to exercise due diligence, which is professionally unacceptable. Professionals in similar situations should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the relevant jurisdictions and the specific legal question at hand. This is followed by a thorough research phase, consulting official government websites, statutes, and reciprocity information provided by the relevant state agencies. If ambiguity remains, seeking advice from legal counsel specializing in firearm law is a prudent step. The ultimate goal is to make an informed decision that ensures full compliance with all applicable laws and maintains the highest standards of personal responsibility. Question 7. The investigation demonstrates that a resident of New Jersey who holds a valid New Jersey permit to carry a handgun is planning a hunting trip to Pennsylvania and intends to carry their firearm for personal protection while traveling through and staying within the Commonwealth. What is the most appropriate course of action for this individual to ensure legal compliance with Pennsylvania's firearm regulations? Option A. Assume that a valid New Jersey permit to carry a handgun is recognized in Pennsylvania due to general reciprocity agreements between states. Option B. Rely on informal advice from online firearm enthusiast forums regarding the legality of carrying a firearm in Pennsylvania with a New Jersey permit. Option C. Proactively verify the current reciprocity status between New Jersey and Pennsylvania regarding firearm carry permits, and if necessary, apply for a Pennsylvania non-resident license to carry firearms. Option D. Proceed with carrying the firearm in Pennsylvania based on their New Jersey permit, believing that personal protection while traveling is implicitly permitted. Correct answer is C. Proactively verify the current reciprocity status between New Jersey and Pennsylvania regarding firearm carry permits, and if necessary, apply for a Pennsylvania non-resident license to carry firearms. Explanation. The investigation demonstrates a common challenge faced by individuals seeking to carry firearms across state lines. Understanding and adhering to the complex web of reciprocity agreements and licensing requirements. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires meticulous attention to detail, a thorough understanding of Pennsylvania's specific firearm laws, and the ability to navigate the nuances of interjurisdictional recognition of permits. A failure to do so can lead to serious legal consequences, including criminal charges. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance and avoid unintentional violations. The correct approach involves proactively verifying the current reciprocity status between Pennsylvania and the destination state, and understanding the specific requirements for a Pennsylvania non-resident license to carry firearms if reciprocity is not fully established or if the individual intends to establish residency. This approach is correct because it prioritizes legal compliance and safety by ensuring the individual possesses the necessary legal authorization to carry a firearm in both jurisdictions. Pennsylvania law, specifically the Uniform Firearms Act 18 C. S. Section 6101, et seq., governs the issuance of licenses to carry firearms, while Pennsylvania recognizes permits from other states under certain conditions. This recognition is not automatic and can be subject to change or specific limitations. Therefore, confirming the current status and obtaining a Pennsylvania non-resident license, if needed, is the most prudent and legally sound course of action. An incorrect approach would be to assume that a valid license from another state automatically grants the right to carry a firearm in Pennsylvania without further verification. This is professionally unacceptable because it disregards the principle of jurisdictional sovereignty in firearm regulation. Pennsylvania has its own licensing requirements, and while it may offer reciprocity, this is a privilege granted by the state, not an inherent right. Relying solely on an out-of-state permit without confirming Pennsylvania's specific recognition and requirements could lead to a violation of the Uniform Firearms Act. Another incorrect approach would be to rely on informal advice from friends or online forums regarding reciprocity. This is professionally unacceptable as it substitutes unreliable hearsay for official legal guidance. Firearm laws are precise and subject to interpretation and change, making informal advice a dangerous basis for legal action. The legal ramifications of carrying a firearm without proper authorization are severe, and such reliance demonstrates a lack of due diligence and professional responsibility. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to ignore the issue entirely and carry the firearm based on the assumption that it is permissible. This is the most egregious failure, as it demonstrates a complete disregard for the law and the safety of others. It is professionally unacceptable because it prioritizes personal convenience over legal obligation and public safety, exposing the individual to significant legal penalties and potentially endangering the community. The professional reasoning process for such situation should involve a systematic approach. First, identify the relevant jurisdictions involved. Second, research the specific firearm carry laws of each jurisdiction, paying close attention to licensing requirements and reciprocity agreements. Third, consult official sources such as state police websites, legislative statutes, or legal counsel specializing in firearm law. Fourth, if there is any ambiguity or if reciprocity is not clearly established, err on the side of caution and obtain the necessary permits or licenses for all intended jurisdictions. Question 8. Analysis of a scenario where a Pennsylvania firearms dealer is presented with a potential buyer who is a resident of Ohio and wishes to purchase a handgun. The buyer presents a valid Ohio driver's license and states they are legally permitted to carry a firearm in Ohio. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Pennsylvania dealer to ensure compliance with Pennsylvania law regarding the sale and possession of firearms by non-residents? Option A. Rely solely on the buyer's verbal assurance that they are legally permitted to carry a firearm in Ohio and complete the sale. Option B. Assume that since the buyer is not a Pennsylvania resident, Pennsylvania's licensing requirements for carrying firearms do not apply to this transaction. Option C. Accept the buyer's Ohio driver's license as sufficient proof of their legal right to carry a firearm in Ohio and proceed with the sale. Option D. Request and verify the buyer possesses a valid, current license to carry firearms, LTCF, issued by the state of Ohio. The correct answer is D. Request and verify the buyer possesses a valid, current license to carry firearms, LTCF, issued by the state of Ohio, Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a firearms dealer in Pennsylvania to navigate the complexities of verifying a non-resident's eligibility to possess a firearm, specifically concerning their home state's licensing requirements. The dealer must balance facilitating a legal sale with their legal obligation to prevent prohibited individuals from acquiring firearms. Misinterpreting or failing to adequately verify the non-resident status could lead to severe legal penalties and ethical breaches. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves the firearms dealer meticulously verifying that the non-resident applicant possesses a valid, current license to carry firearms, LTCF, issued by their state of residence. This approach is correct because Pennsylvania law, under 18 Pa. C. S. Section 6106, generally prohibits carrying firearms without a license. While exceptions exist for a non-resident purchasing a firearm in Pennsylvania, ensuring they have the equivalent authorization from their home state is the most robust method to comply with both Pennsylvania's intent and the spirit of federal firearms regulation, which aim to prevent interstate trafficking of firearms to prohibited persons. This verification directly addresses the requirement for lawful possession and carrying. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to accept the non-resident's assertion that they are legally permitted to carry a firearm in their home state without any documentary proof. This fails to meet the dealer's due diligence requirement. The law requires verification, not mere self-attestation, and relying solely on the buyer's word leaves the dealer vulnerable to unknowingly facilitating an illegal transfer. Another incorrect approach is to assume that because the non-resident is not a Pennsylvania resident, Pennsylvania's LTCF requirements do not apply to their possession of a firearm purchased in Pennsylvania. This overlooks the fact that the transaction occurs within Pennsylvania, and the dealer has a responsibility to ensure the sale is lawful under Pennsylvania law, and that the buyer is not prohibited from possessing a firearm. Furthermore, accepting a driver's license as sufficient proof of eligibility to carry a firearm in their home state is incorrect. A driver's license confirms residency and identity, but does not, by itself, grant the authority to carry a concealed firearm, which is the purview of a specific LTCF. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a proactive and diligent approach to compliance. This involves understanding the specific requirements of the jurisdiction where the sale is taking place, Pennsylvania, and cross-referencing them with the applicant's home state regulations, particularly concerning the possession and carrying of firearms. A systematic process of documentation and verification, including requesting and examining the applicant's valid LTCF from their state of residence, is paramount. When in doubt, seeking clarification from relevant authorities or legal counsel is a sign of professional responsibility. Question 9. Consider a scenario where a resident of Delaware, who legally possesses a handgun permit issued by their home state, contacts a firearms licensing consultant in Pennsylvania. The Delaware resident plans to visit family in Pennsylvania for an extended period and wishes to carry their handgun for personal protection during their stay. They are seeking guidance on whether their Delaware permit is sufficient for carrying a concealed handgun in Pennsylvania. What is the most accurate and legally sound advice to provide? Option A. Inform the individual that their valid Delaware handgun permit is automatically recognized in Pennsylvania, allowing them to carry a concealed handgun without any further application or requirements. Option B. Suggest that since they are only visiting Pennsylvania for a temporary period, they do not need a Pennsylvania license to carry firearms to carry their handgun for self-defense. Option C. Recommend that the individual contact the Delaware State Police to inquire about reciprocity agreements between Delaware and Pennsylvania, implying that this is the sole determinant of their ability to carry in Pennsylvania. Option D. Advise the individual that while their Delaware permit is valid in Delaware, to legally carry a concealed handgun in Pennsylvania, they must apply for and obtain a Pennsylvania license to carry firearms, demonstrating a proper need to carry a firearm within the Commonwealth. The correct answer is D. Advise the individual that while their Delaware permit is valid in Delaware, to legally carry a concealed handgun in Pennsylvania, they must apply for and obtain a Pennsylvania license to carry firearms, demonstrating a proper need to carry a firearm within the Commonwealth. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a thorough understanding of Pennsylvania's specific requirements for non-resident license to carry firearms, LTCF, applications, particularly concerning the applicant's out-of-state residency and their intent to possess a firearm in Pennsylvania. Misinterpreting or overlooking these nuances can lead to improper advice, potentially resulting in an applicant being denied a license or, worse, violating Pennsylvania law. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with the Pennsylvania Uniform Firearms Act. The best approach involves accurately advising the applicant that Pennsylvania law, specifically 18 PA. C.S. Section 6109, outlines the conditions under which a non-resident may obtain an LTCF. This requires the applicant to demonstrate a proper need to carry a firearm for self-defense, which is a standard requirement for all applicants, resident or non-resident. Furthermore, the applicant must meet all other eligibility criteria, including age and background checks, as if they were a Pennsylvania resident applying for the license. The critical element for a non-resident is the demonstration of a genuine need to carry a firearm within Pennsylvania, not merely a desire to possess one. This aligns with the legislative intent of the Act, which is to regulate the carrying of firearms for protection. An incorrect approach would be to assume that simply possessing a valid LTCF from another state automatically grants reciprocal rights to carry in Pennsylvania without a Pennsylvania-issued LTCF, or without meeting Pennsylvania's specific proper needs standard. While reciprocity agreements exist, they generally allow a non-resident to carry if they are licensed in their home state, and that state has a reciprocity agreement with Pennsylvania. However, applying for a Pennsylvania LTCF as a non-resident still necessitates meeting Pennsylvania's criteria, including the proper need. Another incorrect approach is to advise the applicant that they do not need a Pennsylvania LTCF if they are only visiting for a short period. Pennsylvania law requires an LTCF for carrying a handgun concealed within the Commonwealth, regardless of the duration of the visit, unless specific exceptions apply, which are generally not applicable to concealed carry for self-defense by a non-resident. Finally, advising the applicant that their out-of-state permit is sufficient without verifying Pennsylvania's specific requirements for non-resident applications, and the proper needs standard, is a failure to provide accurate and complete legal guidance. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding the specific statutory requirements of the jurisdiction in question. This involves consulting the relevant statutes, in this case, the Pennsylvania Uniform Firearms Act, identifying any specific provisions for non-residents, and understanding the core eligibility criteria for all applicants. When advising a client, the professional must clearly articulate these requirements, explain the rationale behind them, and guide the client through the application process accurately, ensuring all legal obligations are met. Question 10. During the evaluation of a non-resident applicant's application for a Pennsylvania license to carry firearms, LTCF, the applicant, Mr. Smith, a resident of Delaware, has submitted a check for $25,000. The Pennsylvania statute for non-resident LTCF applications specifies a base fee of $20,000 plus an additional $5,000 for background check processing. Mr. Smith's application package is otherwise complete and compliant with all other requirements. What is the correct financial action the issuing authority should take regarding Mr. Smith's application fee? Option A. Accept the $25,000 check, as it correctly covers the base fee of $20,000 and the additional $5,000 for background check processing as stipulated by Pennsylvania law for non-resident applicants. Option B. Accept the $25,000 check and process the application, assuming the additional $5,000 was a voluntary overpayment to expedite the process. Option C. Return the $25,000 check to the applicant and request a new check for $30,000, as the applicant has underestimated the total fee by $5,000, and a higher amount is generally advisable for non-resident applications. Option D. Reject the application due to an insufficient fee, as the applicant should have included an additional $10,000 for administrative processing, which is a standard but unstated fee for non-residents. The correct answer is A. Accept the $25,000 check, as it correctly covers the base fee of $20,000 and the additional $5,000 for background check processing as stipulated by Pennsylvania law for non-resident applicants. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a precise understanding of Pennsylvania's statutory requirements for non-resident applicants seeking a license to carry firearms, LTCF, specifically concerning the calculation of application fees and the accurate reporting of required information. Misinterpreting these requirements can lead to application rejection, delays, and potential legal ramifications for both the applicant and the issuing authority. The core of the challenge lies in applying the statutory fee structure correctly, which involves a base fee and a potential additional fee based on specific circumstances, and ensuring all documentation aligns with these calculations. The best approach involves meticulously calculating the total application fee by summing the statutory base fee for a non-resident application with any applicable additional fees as outlined in Pennsylvania law. This approach is correct because it directly adheres to the legislative mandate for application fees, ensuring full compliance with 18 PA C.S. Section 6109. Specifically, the law dictates a base fee for non-residents, and this approach correctly accounts for that. Furthermore, it ensures that the applicant submits the precise amount required, preventing administrative issues and demonstrating diligence. An incorrect approach would be to only remit the base fee without considering any additional statutory requirements that might apply to non-residents, such as those related to background check processing or specific administrative costs. This fails to meet the full financial obligation mandated by law, potentially leading to an incomplete application and rejection. Another incorrect approach would be to estimate the fee based on general knowledge of firearm licensing fees in other states or a perceived standard. This is professionally unacceptable, as it disregards the specific statutory fee structure established by Pennsylvania law. Reliance on assumptions rather than the explicit legal requirements is a critical failure. A further incorrect approach would be to include a significantly inflated fee beyond the statutory requirements, perhaps as a precautionary measure. While seemingly intended to avoid issues, this is also professionally unsound. It misrepresents the applicant's understanding of the fee structure and could lead to administrative complications in processing the overpayment and returning the excess funds, creating unnecessary work for the issuing authority and potentially raising questions about the applicant's financial acumen. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes strict adherence to statutory requirements. This involves consulting the relevant Pennsylvania statutes, specifically 18 PA C.S. Section 6109, for the exact fee structure applicable to non-resident LTCF applications. Any ambiguity should be resolved by seeking clarification from the Pennsylvania State Police or the relevant county sheriff's office responsible for issuing the license. Calculations should be double-checked to ensure accuracy before submission. Question 11. Research into the legal implications of carrying a firearm across state lines for a Pennsylvania resident holding a valid license to carry firearms, LTCF, reveals a common point of confusion. A Pennsylvania resident plans a road trip through several states, including Ohio, West Virginia, and Maryland, and wishes to carry their legally owned handgun. They possess a valid Pennsylvania LTCF. What is the most prudent and legally sound course of action to ensure compliance with firearm carry laws in all states they will be traveling through? Option A. Only check Pennsylvania's official reciprocity list to see which states acknowledge its LTCF and proceed with carrying the firearm without further investigation into the destination state-specific regulations. Option B. Assume that a valid Pennsylvania LTCF is recognized in all states due to federal interstate commerce laws related to firearms. Option C. Proactively research the specific firearm carry laws and reciprocity agreements for Ohio, West Virginia, and Maryland by consulting their respective official state government websites and legislative statutes to determine the legality and any specific requirements for carrying a firearm as a non-resident permit holder. Option D. Rely on information from online firearm enthusiast forums and personal anecdotes from other travelers regarding which states are generally permissive of out-of-state permits. The correct answer is C. Proactively research the specific firearm carry laws and reciprocity agreements for Ohio, West Virginia, and Maryland by consulting their respective official state government websites and legislative statutes to determine the legality and any specific requirements for carrying a firearm as a non-resident permit holder. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Pennsylvania resident seeking to carry a firearm outside the Commonwealth. The core difficulty lies in navigating the reciprocity agreements between Pennsylvania and other states, understanding the limitations of a Pennsylvania license to carry firearms, LTCF, when crossing state lines, and ensuring compliance with the specific laws of the destination state. Misinterpreting these agreements can lead to serious legal consequences, including potential arrest and prosecution for unlawful possession of a firearm. Careful judgment is required to identify the correct legal pathway and avoid assumptions based on the validity of the Pennsylvania LTCF within its home state. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves proactively researching and understanding the specific firearm, carry laws and reciprocity agreements of the destination state before traveling. This means consulting official government resources of the destination state, e.g., state police websites, legislative statutes, and potentially seeking legal counsel if the situation is complex. This approach is correct because a Pennsylvania LTCF is only recognized in other states to the extent that those states have entered into reciprocity agreements with Pennsylvania. The validity of carrying a firearm in another state is governed by that state's laws, not solely by the issuing state's license. Adhering to the destination state's regulations ensures lawful possession and carriage, preventing potential violations. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is assuming that a valid Pennsylvania LTCF automatically grants the right to carry a firearm in any other state. This is a significant regulatory failure because reciprocity is not universal and is subject to the specific laws and agreements of each individual state. Many states have their own licensing requirements or may not recognize Pennsylvania permits at all, or only under specific conditions. Another incorrect approach is relying solely on informal advice from friends or online forums regarding firearm reciprocity. This is professionally unacceptable due to the high risk of misinformation. Laws and reciprocity agreements can change, and informal sources are not authoritative. Relying on such advice can lead to a misunderstanding of legal requirements and potential violations. A third incorrect approach is to only check Pennsylvania's reciprocity list without verifying the destination state's current laws. While Pennsylvania's list indicates which states recognize its LTCF, it does not guarantee that the destination state will honor the permit without additional requirements or restrictions. The onus is on the permit holder to ensure they are compliant with the laws of the state they are entering. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing this situation should adopt a systematic approach. First, identify the destination state. Second, consult the official government websites of those states to determine their laws regarding carrying firearms by non-residents and their specific reciprocity agreements with Pennsylvania. Third, if there is any ambiguity or if the destination state has complex regulations, seek clarification from the relevant law enforcement agency in that state or consult with an attorney specializing in firearm law in that jurisdiction. This methodical process prioritizes legal compliance and minimizes risk. Question 12. Governance review demonstrates that a Pennsylvania resident has applied for a license to carry firearms. The applicant's submitted documentation appears complete, but the reviewing officer recalls a prior, unrelated incident involving the applicant that may raise questions about their suitability. The officer is unsure if this past incident constitutes a legal disqualifier under Pennsylvania law. What is the most appropriate course of action for the reviewing officer? Option A. Inform the applicant that their application is being held indefinitely due to an unspecified past incident, requiring them to provide extensive personal history beyond what is legally mandated. Option B. Issue the license to carry firearms without further investigation, as the submitted documentation appears complete on its face. Option C. Conduct a thorough investigation into the nature of the prior incident, cross-referencing it with the disqualifying criteria outlined in the Pennsylvania Uniform Firearms Act, and if necessary, request further information or clarification from the applicant before making a decision. Option D. Immediately deny the application based on the officer's recollection of the prior incident, assuming it is a disqualifier without further verification. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough investigation into the nature of the prior incident, cross-referencing it with the disqualifying criteria outlined in the Pennsylvania Uniform Firearms Act, and if necessary, Request further information or clarification from the applicant before making a decision. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent responsibility of ensuring compliance with Pennsylvania's firearm licensing regulations, particularly when dealing with an applicant who has a history that might raise concerns. The core of the challenge lies in balancing the applicant's right to apply with the state's mandate to protect public safety by thoroughly vetting all applicants for a license to carry firearms. Careful judgment is required to avoid both arbitrary denial and the issuance of a license to an individual who may pose a risk. The best professional approach involves a meticulous review of all submitted documentation and a thorough investigation into any disqualifying factors as defined by Pennsylvania law, specifically the Uniform Firearms Act. This includes verifying the applicant's residency, ensuring they meet the age requirements, and critically examining any past criminal convictions, adjudications of mental defect, or other statutory disqualifiers. If the initial review reveals potential issues, the appropriate next step is to request additional information or clarification from the applicant and consult relevant Pennsylvania statutes and case law to determine if the applicant is legally prohibited from possessing a firearm or obtaining a license. This approach prioritizes adherence to the law and due diligence, ensuring that the decision is based on objective criteria and legal precedent, thereby safeguarding public safety while respecting the applicant's rights. An incorrect approach would be to immediately deny the application based solely on a vague concern or an incomplete understanding of the applicant's history, without conducting a full investigation. This fails to provide the applicant with due process and may violate their rights if the denial is not supported by specific statutory disqualifications. Another incorrect approach is to overlook potential red flags in the applicant's background, such as a history of domestic disputes or mental health treatment, without further inquiry. This abdication of responsibility could lead to the issuance of a license to an individual who poses a risk to themselves or others, directly contravening the purpose of the licensing process and Pennsylvania's public safety objectives. Furthermore, relying on personal assumptions or biases rather than objective legal standards to assess the applicant's suitability is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. Professionals in this role should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a comprehensive understanding of the Pennsylvania Uniform Firearms Act and its implementing regulations. This framework should emphasize objective evidence, thorough documentation, and a commitment to fairness and due process. When faced with ambiguity, professionals must actively seek clarification through official channels, consult legal counsel if necessary, and always err on the side of caution when public safety is a concern, ensuring that any denial is well documented and legally defensible. Question 13. Compliance review shows that a licensed firearms dealer in Pennsylvania has received an application for a non-resident license to carry firearms from an individual who resides in New Jersey. The applicant has provided a valid New Jersey firearms permit and stated they have complied with all New Jersey state laws regarding firearm ownership. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Pennsylvania dealer to ensure compliance with Pennsylvania's regulations? Option A. Deny the application outright, citing the applicant's New Jersey residency as grounds for ineligibility for a Pennsylvania non-resident license. Option B. Process the application by verifying the applicant meets all Pennsylvania statutory requirements for a non-resident license to carry firearms, including background checks and residency criteria as defined by Pennsylvania law, irrespective of their New Jersey permit. Option C. Forward the application to New Jersey authorities for their approval before proceeding with the Pennsylvania licensing process. Option D. Accept the applicant's New Jersey firearms permit as sufficient proof of eligibility and issue the Pennsylvania non-resident license without further verification of Pennsylvania-specific requirements. The correct answer is B. Process the application by verifying the applicant meets all Pennsylvania statutory requirements for a non-resident license to carry firearms, including background checks and residency criteria as defined by Pennsylvania law, irrespective of their New Jersey permit. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Pennsylvania licensed firearms dealer who has received an application for a non-resident license to carry firearms from an individual residing in New Jersey. The core challenge lies in correctly identifying and applying the relevant jurisdictional requirements for processing such an application, given that Pennsylvania law governs the issuance of its own licenses. But the applicant's state of residence has its own firearm regulations. Misinterpreting these requirements could lead to the improper issuance or denial of a license, potentially violating Pennsylvania law and impacting interstate firearm reciprocity. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with Pennsylvania's specific statutes and regulations concerning non-resident applicants. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves adhering strictly to Pennsylvania's statutory framework for issuing non-resident licenses to carry firearms. This means verifying that the applicant meets all the qualifications outlined in the Pennsylvania Uniform Firearm Act, 18 Pa. C. S. Section 6106 et sec., including age, residency requirements, as defined by Pennsylvania law for non-residents seeking a Pennsylvania license, and the absence of disqualifying factors such as a criminal record or mental health history, as defined by Pennsylvania law. The dealer must also ensure the applicant has completed any required Pennsylvania-specific training or background checks mandated by the Commonwealth. The justification for this approach is rooted in Pennsylvania's sovereign right to define the criteria for carrying firearms within its borders, regardless of the applicant's primary state of residence. The Uniform Firearm Act clearly delineates the process and requirements for both resident and non-resident applicants seeking a Pennsylvania license to carry firearms. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach would be to solely rely on the applicant's New Jersey firearms permit or the laws of New Jersey to determine eligibility for a Pennsylvania non-resident license. This is a regulatory failure because Pennsylvania law is the governing authority for issuing its own licenses. While New Jersey's laws are relevant to the applicant's ability to carry firearms in their home state, they do not dictate the requirements for obtaining a Pennsylvania license. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that because the applicant is a New Jersey resident, they are automatically ineligible for a Pennsylvania non-resident license without a thorough review of Pennsylvania's specific criteria for non-residents. This is an ethical and regulatory failure, as Pennsylvania law provides a pathway for eligible non-residents to obtain a license, and denying this opportunity based on an unsubstantiated assumption violates the spirit and letter of the law. A further incorrect approach would be to process the application without verifying the applicant's identity and background according to Pennsylvania's standards, perhaps by accepting documentation solely from New Jersey authorities without cross-referencing with Pennsylvania's requirements. This represents a significant regulatory failure, as Pennsylvania has specific procedures and checks it must perform to ensure public safety and compliance with its own firearm laws. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes strict adherence to the governing jurisdiction's laws. This involves 1. Identifying the governing jurisdiction, Pennsylvania, for the license issuance. 2. Thoroughly understanding the specific statutory requirements of that jurisdiction for the type of license being applied for, paying close attention to any provisions for non-residents. 3. Verifying all applicant information against the established criteria of the governing jurisdiction. 4. Consulting official guidance or legal counsel if any ambiguity exists regarding the application of the law to a specific case. This systematic approach ensures compliance and upholds professional responsibility. Question 14. The control framework reveals that Mr. Silas, a resident of Delaware, wishes to obtain a Pennsylvania non-resident license to carry firearms. He has no criminal convictions in Delaware, but has a history of seeking voluntary mental health treatment several years ago, which did not result in any formal adjudication or commitment. He believes this is irrelevant to his application. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing authority to take regarding Mr. Silas's application for a Pennsylvania non-resident license to carry firearms? Option A. Grant the Pennsylvania non-resident license to carry firearms based on his lack of criminal convictions in Delaware, assuming his voluntary mental health treatment is not a disqualifier. Option B. Thoroughly review Mr. Silas's application, including verifying his Delaware residency and inquiring about the voluntary mental health treatment to determine if it constitutes a disqualifying factor under Pennsylvania law, and ensure all required documentation is complete and accurate. Option C. Deny the application solely because of the past voluntary mental health treatment, without further investigation into its nature or Pennsylvania's specific criteria for disqualification. Option D. Advise Mr. Silas to omit any mention of his past voluntary mental health treatment from his application, as it did not result in a formal adjudication and is unlikely to be discovered. Correct answer is B. Thoroughly review Mr. Silas's application, including verifying his Delaware residency and inquiring about the voluntary mental health treatment to determine if it constitutes a disqualifying factor under Pennsylvania law, and ensure all required documentation is complete and accurate. Explanation: the control framework reveals a scenario where an individual, Mr. Silas, is seeking to obtain a Pennsylvania non-resident license to carry firearms. The professional challenge lies in accurately assessing his eligibility based on the specific requirements of Pennsylvania law, particularly concerning his residency status and any potential disqualifying factors that might arise from his out-of-state history, even if not explicitly criminal. Navigating the nuances of bona fide resident and ensuring all documentation is in order without misrepresenting his situation is critical. The best professional approach involves a thorough review of Mr. Silas's application and supporting documentation, cross-referencing it against the Pennsylvania Uniform Firearm Act, 18 Pa. C. S. Section 6101 et sec., and relevant Pennsylvania State Police guidance for non-resident applicants. This includes verifying his primary residence in his home state and ensuring he meets all other eligibility criteria, such as age and the absence of disqualifying mental health adjudications or specific types of convictions that would preclude him from carrying a firearm in Pennsylvania. The justification for this approach is rooted in strict adherence to the law, which mandates that applicants must meet specific criteria to be granted a license. Misrepresenting information or failing to disclose relevant details, even if not a direct criminal conviction in his home state, could lead to denial or revocation of the license and potentially further legal consequences. An incorrect approach would be to assume that because Mr. Silas has no criminal record in his home state, he automatically qualifies for a Pennsylvania non-resident license. This fails to account for other potential disqualifiers outlined in Pennsylvania law, such as certain mental health adjudications or specific types of civil restraining orders that might not be considered criminal offenses, but still impact firearm carry rights. Another incorrect approach would be to advise Mr. Silas to omit any information about a past mental health evaluation that did not result in a formal adjudication, believing it to be irrelevant. Pennsylvania law requires disclosure of such information, and failure to do so constitutes a material misrepresentation on the application, which is grounds for denial and can have serious repercussions. A further incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the information provided by Mr. Silas without independently verifying the completeness and accuracy of his documentation against Pennsylvania's specific requirements for non-resident applicants, potentially overlooking subtle but critical omissions. The professional reasoning process for such situations should involve a systematic review of all application components against the governing statutes and regulations. This includes understanding the definition of bona fide resident, as it applies to non-residents seeking a license, identifying all potential disqualifying factors beyond criminal convictions, and ensuring complete and truthful disclosure by the applicant. When in doubt about the interpretation of a specific law or the implications of an applicant's history, seeking clarification from the Pennsylvania State Police or legal counsel specializing in firearm law is paramount to ensure compliance and ethical practice. Question 15. Compliance review shows that a resident of Delaware who legally possesses a license to carry firearms in their home state is planning a visit to Pennsylvania and intends to carry their handgun. They have heard that firearm reciprocity generally allows them to carry in other states. What is the most appropriate course of action for this individual to ensure they are legally compliant with Pennsylvania law regarding carrying firearms as a non-resident? Option A. Assume their Delaware license to carry firearms is valid for carrying in Pennsylvania due to general reciprocity principles. Option B. Rely on advice from a firearms dealer in Pennsylvania regarding the legality of carrying with their Delaware license. Option C. Carry their handgun in Pennsylvania, believing that as long as they are legally armed in Delaware, they are permitted to do so in Pennsylvania. Option D. Proactively research and apply for a Pennsylvania license to carry firearms as a non-resident, ensuring all statutory requirements are met. The correct answer is D. Proactively research and apply for a Pennsylvania license to carry firearms as a non-resident, ensuring all statutory requirements are met. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the applicant to navigate the specific requirements for obtaining a Pennsylvania non-resident license to carry firearms, which involves understanding the interplay between their home state's laws and Pennsylvania's statutory framework. The applicant's reliance on a general understanding of firearm reciprocity without verifying Pennsylvania's specific requirements for non-residents is a critical oversight. Careful judgment is required to ensure all legal prerequisites are met to avoid potential legal ramifications. The correct approach involves the applicant proactively researching and adhering to Pennsylvania's statutory requirements for non-residents seeking a license to carry firearms. This includes understanding that Pennsylvania law, specifically 18 PA. C. S. Section 6106, outlines the conditions under which a non-resident may be issued a license. This approach is correct because it prioritizes direct compliance with the governing jurisdiction's laws, ensuring the application is complete and accurate according to Pennsylvania's specific mandates for non-residents, thereby demonstrating due diligence and respect for the legal process. An incorrect approach involves assuming that a valid license to carry firearms from their home state automatically grants them the right to carry in Pennsylvania without further application or verification. This fails to acknowledge that reciprocity agreements or general assumptions about firearm laws do not supersede the specific licensing requirements of Pennsylvania for non-residents. As outlined in its statutes, this approach is ethically and legally flawed as it bypasses the established legal framework for carrying firearms in Pennsylvania. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on informal advice from a firearms dealer or online forums without consulting official Pennsylvania government resources or the relevant statutes. While such sources may offer general information, they are not authoritative and can lead to misinformation. This approach is professionally unacceptable because it demonstrates a lack of commitment to verifying critical legal information from reliable sources, potentially leading to an invalid application or a violation of the law. A further incorrect approach is to submit an application without fully understanding the residency requirements or the specific documentation needed for a non-resident applicant under Pennsylvania law. This could result in a delayed or denied application due to incomplete or incorrect information, demonstrating a failure to prepare adequately for the application process. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a systematic approach. First, identify the specific jurisdiction whose laws govern the activity, in this case, Pennsylvania. Second, thoroughly research the applicable statutes and regulations of that jurisdiction pertaining to the applicant's status, non-resident. Third, consult official government websites or legal counsel for definitive guidance. Fourth, ensure all application requirements are met precisely as stipulated by the governing jurisdiction before submitting any documentation. Question 16. Which approach would be most appropriate for a Pennsylvania Sheriff's Office when reviewing an application for a non-resident license to carry firearms from an individual who has a documented report of a verbal altercation with law enforcement in another state, though no charges were filed or arrest made? Option A. Conduct a thorough background investigation into the reported altercation, reviewing any available documentation and potentially contacting the law enforcement agency involved to assess if the applicant meets the good repute standard required by Pennsylvania law before making a decision. Option B. Approve the license without further inquiry, assuming that the absence of a conviction or arrest means the applicant is automatically qualified under Pennsylvania law. Option C. Rely solely on the applicant's self-reported information regarding the incident and approve the license if all other application requirements are met. Option D. Immediately deny the application based on the reported altercation, as any interaction with law enforcement, even without charges, suggests a potential issue with the applicant's character. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough background investigation into the reported altercation, reviewing any available documentation and potentially contacting the law enforcement agency involved to assess if the applicant meets the good repute standard required by Pennsylvania law before making a decision. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a careful balancing of an individual's right to self-defense, as codified by Pennsylvania law, with the strict requirements for obtaining and maintaining a license to carry a firearm. The applicant's past behavior, while not resulting in a disqualifying conviction, raises concerns about their suitability and adherence to the spirit of the law, which emphasizes responsible gun ownership. A licensing authority must exercise sound judgment to uphold public safety without infringing upon lawful rights. The best approach involves a thorough review of all submitted documentation and a comprehensive background check, including any available records of prior incidents, even if they did not lead to formal charges or convictions. This approach is correct because Pennsylvania law, under 18 Pa. C.S. Section 6109, requires the licensing authority to be satisfied that the applicant is of good repute and that the license is proper for the protection of the applicant. This includes investigating any information that might suggest the applicant is not of good repute or that issuing a license would be improper. The licensing authority has a duty to investigate red flags, and the reported incident, even without a conviction, could be considered such a red flag, warranting further inquiry to determine if the applicant meets the good repute standard. An approach that immediately denies the application based solely on the reported incident, without further investigation or consideration of the applicant's overall history and the specific circumstances of the incident, is incorrect. This fails to adhere to the due process inherent in the licensing process and may violate the applicant's rights if the incident, upon closer examination, does not demonstrate a lack of good repute or a threat to public safety. Another incorrect approach would be to approve the license without any further consideration of the reported incident, assuming that the absence of a conviction means the applicant is automatically qualified. This overlooks the licensing authority's affirmative duty to be satisfied of the applicant's good repute and the propriety of issuing the license. It prioritizes expediency over due diligence and potentially compromises public safety. Finally, an approach that solely relies on the applicant's self-reported information without independent verification or investigation of the reported incident is also professionally unsound. This abdication of responsibility fails to meet the statutory requirement for the licensing authority to be satisfied of the applicant's qualifications and could lead to the issuance of a license to an individual who may not be suitable. Professionals in this role should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes thoroughness, fairness, and adherence to statutory requirements. This involves a systematic review of all application materials, conducting comprehensive background checks, investigating any concerning information identified, and making a determination based on the totality of the evidence, always with the goal of upholding both individual rights and public safety as mandated by Pennsylvania law. Question 17. Investigation of a Pennsylvania resident's application for a non-resident license to carry firearms reveals a prior misdemeanor conviction for simple assault. The applicant believes this conviction is minor and may not be considered a disqualifying offense under Pennsylvania law, as it did not involve domestic violence as they understand the term. What is the most appropriate course of action for the applicant to ensure compliance with Pennsylvania's licensing requirements? Option A. Omit the misdemeanor conviction for simple assault from the application, assuming it is not a disqualifying offense. Option B. Fully disclose the misdemeanor conviction for simple assault on the application and allow the Pennsylvania State Police to determine eligibility based on all applicable laws. Option C. Disclose only convictions that the applicant believes are significant or directly related to firearm offenses. Option D. Proceed with the application without disclosing the conviction, relying on their personal interpretation of federal and state firearm laws. The correct answer is B. Fully disclose the misdemeanor conviction for simple assault on the application and allow the Pennsylvania State Police to determine eligibility based on all applicable laws. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant to navigate the specific requirements for obtaining a Pennsylvania non-resident license to carry firearms, which involves understanding the interplay between federal law and Pennsylvania's statutory framework for firearm permits. The applicant's prior legal history, specifically a misdemeanor conviction for simple assault, presents a direct conflict with federal prohibitions on firearm possession for individuals convicted of domestic violence misdemeanors, and potentially with Pennsylvania's own eligibility criteria. Careful judgment is required to accurately assess eligibility and avoid misrepresenting information, which could have severe legal consequences. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves the applicant proactively and truthfully disclosing their entire criminal history, including the misdemeanor conviction for simple assault, to the Pennsylvania State Police during the application process. This aligns with Pennsylvania law, specifically 18 PA C.S. Section 6109E, which mandates that an applicant for a license to carry a firearm must provide a complete criminal history record. Furthermore, federal law 18 U.S.C. Section 922G(9) generally prohibits individuals convicted of a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence from possessing firearms. While the applicant may believe their conviction does not fall under this definition or that Pennsylvania law might offer an exception, full disclosure is the only legally sound and ethically responsible path. The Pennsylvania State Police will then conduct the necessary background checks and make the determination of eligibility based on all applicable federal and state laws. This approach prioritizes honesty and adherence to the regulatory process, allowing the authorities to make an informed decision. Incorrect approaches analysis. An approach where the applicant omits the misdemeanor conviction for simple assault from their application is professionally unacceptable. This constitutes a material misrepresentation of facts on a legal document, which is a violation of 18 PA C.S. Section 6107A, regarding false statements in an application for a license to carry a firearm. Such an omission directly undermines the integrity of the background check process and could lead to the denial of the license, revocation if granted, and potential criminal charges for perjury or making false statements. Another professionally unacceptable approach is for the applicant to assume their simple assault conviction does not disqualify them based on their interpretation of federal or state law, without seeking clarification or disclosing the conviction. This is a dangerous assumption that bypasses the established legal review process. Pennsylvania law requires disclosure of all criminal history, and the determination of whether a conviction constitutes a disqualifying offense, particularly under federal domestic violence prohibitions, is made by the licensing authority, not the applicant. Proceeding without full disclosure based on personal interpretation is a failure to comply with the spirit and letter of the law. Finally, an approach where the applicant only discloses convictions they believe are relevant or significant is also professionally unacceptable. The Pennsylvania application for a license to carry a firearm requires a complete criminal history. The applicant's subjective judgment about what is relevant is not a substitute for the objective requirement of full disclosure. All convictions, regardless of the applicant's perception of their severity or impact on eligibility, must be reported to allow for a comprehensive review by the Pennsylvania State Police. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation must adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, accuracy, and strict adherence to legal requirements. This involves understanding the specific statutory obligations of the jurisdiction, Pennsylvania in this case, and any relevant federal laws that may impact eligibility. The core principle is to provide all requested information truthfully and completely, allowing the designated authorities to perform their due diligence. When in doubt about the interpretation or applicability of a law, the professional course of action is to disclose the information and allow the authorities to make the determination, rather than making assumptions or attempting to circumvent the process. This approach safeguards against legal repercussions and upholds ethical standards. Question 18. A firearms dealer in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, is processing a sale to an individual presenting a valid-looking license to carry firearms, LTCF, issued by the state of Ohio. The dealer is aware that Pennsylvania has reciprocity with some states for LTCF, but is unsure of the specific requirements for non-residents. What is the most prudent and legally compliant course of action for the dealer to ensure the transaction adheres to Pennsylvania's regulations regarding the sale of firearms to non-residents with out-of-state permits? Option A. Proceed with the sale, but only after contacting the Ohio Attorney General's office to inquire about the individual's general eligibility to carry a firearm in Ohio. Option B. Refuse the sale outright, citing general concerns about out-of-state permits without further investigation into Ohio's reciprocity status or the permit's validity. Option C. Verify that Ohio has a reciprocity agreement with Pennsylvania and confirm the validity of the Ohio LTCF according to Ohio's laws and regulations before completing the sale. Option D. Accept the Ohio LTCF at face value, assuming it is valid for a purchase in Pennsylvania since it appears to be a legitimate government-issued permit. Correct answer is C. Verify that Ohio has a reciprocity agreement with Pennsylvania and confirm the validity of the Ohio LTCF according to Ohio's laws and regulations before completing the sale. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Pennsylvania firearms dealer due to the nuanced requirements for verifying the legitimacy of a non-resident's Pennsylvania license to carry firearms, LTCF. The dealer must balance efficient business operations with strict adherence to Pennsylvania law to prevent illegal firearm sales. Misinterpretation or oversight of the LTCF validity can lead to severe legal penalties and reputational damage. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a multifaceted verification process that directly addresses the specific requirements of Pennsylvania law for non-resident LTCF. This approach requires the dealer to confirm the issuing state's reciprocity with Pennsylvania and to verify that the non-resident's LTCF is current and valid, according to the issuing state's regulations. This aligns with the spirit and letter of Pennsylvania law, which aims to ensure that individuals carrying firearms are legally authorized to do so, regardless of their state of residence, by ensuring their out-of-state permit is recognized and valid. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves solely relying on the visual appearance of the non-resident's LTCF without independently verifying its validity or the issuing state's reciprocity status. This fails to meet the dealer's due diligence obligation under Pennsylvania law, as a visually valid permit could still be expired, revoked, or issued by a state with which Pennsylvania does not have reciprocity. This creates a significant risk of an illegal transfer. Another incorrect approach is to assume that any LTCF from another state is automatically valid for a purchase in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania law specifically outlines reciprocity agreements and requirements for non-resident permits. Ignoring these specific provisions is a direct violation of the regulatory framework and could lead to the sale of a firearm to an individual not legally permitted to possess it in Pennsylvania. A further incorrect approach is to refuse the sale based on a general suspicion without a concrete legal basis, such as a confirmed lack of reciprocity or an invalid permit. While caution is important, arbitrary refusal without proper investigation can lead to customer dissatisfaction and potential claims of discrimination if not handled appropriately and based on established legal grounds. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should adopt a systematic verification process. This involves 1. Identifying the issuing state of the non-resident LTCF. 2. Consulting official Pennsylvania State Police resources or the Pennsylvania Instant Check System, PICS, to determine if that state has a reciprocity agreement with Pennsylvania. 3. If reciprocity exists, verifying the validity of the non-resident's LTCF according to the issuing state's laws and regulations, which may involve contacting the issuing authority or checking their official databases if available. This layered approach ensures compliance with Pennsylvania's specific requirements for non-resident permit holders and upholds the integrity of firearm sales. Question 19. Compliance review shows that a Pennsylvania licensed firearms dealer is processing a sale of a handgun to an individual who claims to be a resident of New Jersey. The buyer presents a valid New Jersey driver's license and states they will be taking the handgun back to their New Jersey residence immediately after purchase. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Pennsylvania dealer to ensure compliance with all applicable laws? Option A. Require the buyer to present their New Jersey driver's license and a secondary form of identification confirming their New Jersey address, such as a utility bill or lease agreement, and confirm that New Jersey law permits the purchase and possession of the handgun by the buyer. Option B. Accept the New Jersey driver's license as sufficient proof of residency and complete the sale, assuming the buyer's statement about taking the handgun to New Jersey is truthful. Option C. Accept a New Jersey post office box as valid proof of residency for the buyer and proceed with the transaction. Option D. Process the sale based on the buyer's New Jersey driver's license and their verbal confirmation that they are legally allowed to own a firearm in New Jersey. The correct answer is A. Require the buyer to present their New Jersey driver's license and a secondary form of identification confirming their New Jersey address, such as a utility bill or lease agreement, and confirm that New Jersey law permits the purchase and possession of the handgun by the buyer. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Pennsylvania licensed firearms dealer due to the potential for violating federal and state regulations concerning the transfer of firearms to non-residents. The core difficulty lies in ensuring strict adherence to the residency requirements for firearm purchases, as outlined by both Pennsylvania law and federal law, to prevent illegal straw purchases or transfers to individuals prohibited from owning firearms in their home state. Misinterpreting or overlooking these requirements can lead to severe legal penalties, including fines, license revocation, and criminal charges. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously verifying the buyer's residency through documentation that unequivocally establishes their domicile in a state other than Pennsylvania. This includes requiring the buyer to present a valid driver's license or state-issued identification card from their state of residence, along with a secondary form of identification that corroborates their address, such as a utility bill or lease agreement. The dealer must then confirm that the buyer's state of residence permits them to legally purchase and possess the firearm in question, and that the transfer complies with the laws of both Pennsylvania and the buyer's home state. This approach directly aligns with the requirements of the Pennsylvania Uniform Firearms Act and federal regulations, ensuring a lawful and responsible firearm transfer. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves accepting a post office box as proof of residency for a non-resident buyer. A post office box is not a domicile and does not establish a fixed, permanent residence, which is a critical requirement for firearm purchases by non-residents. This failure to properly verify residency violates the spirit and letter of Pennsylvania's firearm transfer laws and federal regulations designed to prevent interstate firearm trafficking. Another incorrect approach is to assume that if the buyer possesses a valid driver's license from another state, the transaction is automatically permissible without further inquiry into their home state's laws regarding firearm acquisition. While a driver's license is a primary form of identification, it does not guarantee that the buyer is legally permitted to acquire a firearm in their state of residence, nor does it absolve the dealer of the responsibility to ensure compliance with all applicable laws. A third incorrect approach is to process the sale based solely on the buyer's verbal assurance of their residency and their intent to use the firearm in their home state, without requesting any supporting documentation. This reliance on unverified information creates a significant risk of facilitating an illegal transfer, as it bypasses the essential verification steps mandated by law to prevent prohibited individuals from acquiring firearms. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a proactive and diligent approach to compliance. This involves maintaining a thorough understanding of all applicable federal and state firearm laws, including residency requirements, waiting periods, and prohibited persons criteria. When faced with a transaction involving a non-resident, the decision-making process should prioritize obtaining and verifying all legally required documentation. If there is any ambiguity or doubt regarding the buyer's residency or their eligibility to acquire a firearm, the professional should err on the side of caution and refuse the sale, seeking clarification from legal counsel or the relevant law enforcement agencies if necessary. Question 20. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a Pennsylvania licensed firearms dealer, who is also a non-resident of Pennsylvania, is assisting a client who is also a non-resident of Pennsylvania in applying for a Pennsylvania license to carry firearms, LTCF. The dealer is aware that the application process typically involves a waiting period. If the client were eligible to apply, the standard waiting period for a Pennsylvania LTCF application is 30 days from the date of application submission. However, the client is not a resident of Pennsylvania. What is the correct calculation of the waiting period for this non-resident applicant's Pennsylvania LTCF application? Option A. The waiting period is undefined, and the dealer should advise the applicant to consult with legal counsel to determine if any alternative application process exists for non-residents. Option B. The waiting period is 30 days, calculated from the date the applicant establishes residency in Pennsylvania, assuming they intend to do so. Option C. The waiting period is effectively 0 days, as a non-resident is ineligible to apply for a Pennsylvania license to carry firearms, rendering the concept of a processing waiting period moot. Option D. The waiting period is 30 days, calculated from the date of application submission, as the standard processing time applies regardless of residency status. The correct answer is C. The waiting period is effectively 0 days, as a non-resident is ineligible to apply for a Pennsylvania license to carry firearms, rendering the concept of a processing waiting period moot. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Pennsylvania licensed firearms dealer who is also a licensed out-of-state resident seeking to obtain a Pennsylvania license to carry firearms, LTCF. The core challenge lies in accurately calculating the required waiting period for the LTCF application, which is influenced by the applicant's residency status and the specific timeframe mandated by Pennsylvania law. Misinterpreting or misapplying these waiting period calculations can lead to a flawed application submission, potentially causing delays, denial, or even legal repercussions for both the applicant and the dealer if they are involved in advising on the process. The dealer's dual role as a business owner and an individual applicant necessitates a precise understanding of the legal requirements to avoid conflicts of interest or procedural errors. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a meticulous calculation of the waiting period based on the applicant's status as a non-resident applying for a Pennsylvania LTCF. Pennsylvania law, specifically 18 PA. C. S. Section 6109. A. 1. Mandates that an applicant for a LTCF must be a resident of the Commonwealth. While the question implies the applicant is a non-resident seeking to obtain a Pennsylvania LTCF, the underlying principle for calculating any applicable waiting period, if one were to exist for a non-resident, which is generally not the case for initial application, but could be relevant in other contexts, or if the question were framed differently, would be to strictly adhere to the statutory timelines. In this specific scenario, the critical factor is that a non-resident cannot apply for a Pennsylvania LTCF. Therefore, the waiting period is effectively 0 because the application itself is invalid. The most accurate interpretation of the waiting period in this context is the time it takes for the authorities to process a valid application. Since a non-resident application is not valid, the concept of a waiting period for processing is moot. The dealer should advise the applicant that they are ineligible to apply for a Pennsylvania LTCF as a non-resident. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to calculate a waiting period based on the assumption that a non-resident can apply, and that standard waiting period applies. For instance, if one were to mistakenly apply a hypothetical 30-day waiting period, a common time frame in some firearm-related regulations, but not specifically for non-resident LTCF applications in PA, from the date of application, this would be incorrect because the application itself is fundamentally flawed due to non-residency. This approach fails to recognize the primary eligibility requirement of residency. Another incorrect approach would be to focus on the applicant's Pennsylvania dealer license as a proxy for residency, assuming it somehow negates their non-resident status for LTCF purposes. This is incorrect because a business license in Pennsylvania does not automatically confer residency for the purpose of obtaining a personal LTCF. The law clearly distinguishes between business operations and individual residency for personal rights like carrying a firearm. A third incorrect approach might involve attempting to find a loophole or an alternative interpretation of the residency requirement, perhaps by suggesting the applicant could establish temporary residency. This is incorrect because Pennsylvania law has specific definitions and requirements for establishing residency, and attempting to circumvent these through temporary or informal means is not legally sound and would likely result in application denial and potential penalties. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must prioritize strict adherence to the governing statutes and regulations. When faced with a situation involving eligibility requirements, the first step is to confirm the applicant meets all prerequisites. If an applicant is ineligible based on a fundamental requirement like residency, the professional's duty is to inform the applicant of this ineligibility, rather than attempting to calculate or navigate procedural steps that are predicated on eligibility. This involves understanding the specific language of the law, e.g., 18 PA C. S. Section 6109, A. 1, and applying it directly to the applicant's circumstances. Professionals should always err on the side of caution and transparency, ensuring that all advice and actions are fully compliant with the law.